The Dread Cat Bonkers demands that I end up telling you about something she likes. I have to do this because she's on my lap, and her claws are near certain parts of my body that I don't want to be mangled, and that's what she threatened to do. The Dread Cat Bonkers really isn't going to be doing all that many reviews, but she is going to end up giving credit where credit is due for the things that she likes. And the Dread Cat Bonkers really liked Gramma World, a post-retirement adventure game by David Okum, Okum Arts Games. It's compatible with the Swords and Wizardry white box. Yes, it did start out as a typo about the Gramma World campaign, and David Okum said this has to be a thing, and thus one of the funniest games that the Dread Cat Bonkers has ever seen was born. A little bit of disclosure. When the Dread Cat Bonkers had me run the game, I didn't use Swords and Wizardry. I ported the setting over to Savage Worlds, as some of the players who were playing were either out of the hobby for a few decades or had never played the role-playing game before. And I figured Savage Worlds was a little bit easier for them to end up getting the grok and the hang of than to end up using an OSR rule. About a year and a half or so ago, I was hanging out at the girlfriend's place. Was looking through a Gramma World group on Facebook, and David had posted something about Gramma World. Ended up checking it out on either DriveThruRPG or RPG Now. I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the price, and it was under $6, and Dread Cat Bonkers looked right up at me, and she said, "Shut up and let them take your money." So I ended up downloading it, and as I'm reading through it, I was like, even if I never run this game, just reading it, it was worth the price of admission. There were times when I was reading the book, I was laughing out loud, and all the cats and my girlfriend were looking up at me, wanting to know what the hell was so funny. Yes, Bonkers, I was just getting to that. David leaves his setting open enough so it can end up being as gonzo as you like, or as serious as you like. A good way to describe it would be to throw Golden Girls and Scooby-Doo into a blender with a splash of H.P. Lovecraft and Hunter S. Thompson. Or, on a more serious run, you can end up easily having something like Matlock or Murder, She Wrote. But when you can end up having Gonzo Fun, what would be the sense in running something as plain Jane as what's her name for Murder, She Wrote? I ran 2 adventures. Well, they were the same adventure, but 2 times at the local convention, as well as for some friends of mine. And, well, the friends of ours were all old farts. We're all basically over 40. It focused on pets at a retirement home that were disappearing, along with a handyman's pet pug. The pet pug was actually a hellhound in disguise. The investigation led to a satanic polka club, where the initiation ritual was getting the elderly people to eat kittens. Did I mention that there was a Lawrence Welk bubble machine that spat out hallucinogenic bubbles? That's the type of gonzo fun that you can end up having with this setting. That's the type of hilarious fun that you can end up having with Gramma World. And that's just the beginning. That was just something that the Dread Cat Bonkers told me to pull out of my butt and end up running with. Like I said, the Dread Cat Bonkers really doesn't want to end up doing reviews, and this is more just talking about the book and talking about the setting more than anything else, more than a typical review. But if I'm going to be talking about it, then I may as well talk about what's in the book as well. There's a whole bunch of goodies in there that will end up having you laughing. It's chock full of fun tables. I love tables. Who doesn't love random tables? My girlfriend really loves this one table that's in there. It's called What's in Grandma's Purse? I know I'm screwing that up. I don't have it open in front of me, but it's You basically get the idea. It might be what's in Nana's purse or something like that, but you get the idea. Stuff in there literally had me laughing out loud to the point where she was asking, "What's so funny? What's so funny?" So I had to end up asking her to roll dice, and I was just there, like, reading stuff off of the table for the rolls that she ended up making. Of course, playing elderly characters, there's a list of mental and physical conditions that they're a mix of serious and humorous conditions you'd expect from geriatric characters. Grandma can end up having a mighty shoe throw, nailing an enemy and having the shoe return to her like a boomerang. Or she can end up having leather skin from all those years of suntanning and not using sunscreen, to name two unique geriatric conditions. You can also end up having a stroke or a bad back. There's the driving and the technology advantage, because those are two things that the elderly seem to end up having problems with, which leads me on to the technology section. Well, yeah, you know all those modern gizmos? Yeah, they take some figuring out, and it seems like anything made after the early 1980s, there's a problem with your grandma or grandpa, as the case may be, trying to figure them out. You young kids and your clickety-clackety on those cell phones nowadays. Don't you guys ever just talk to each other anymore? You're sitting across the room from each other and you don't talk. You just clickety-clackety with your thumbs. Well, Grandma's world ends up being sort of like our world, sort of like the Scooby-Doo world, sort of like the X-Files. I don't want to say real world-ish, but if I say real world-ish to another gamer, you know what I'm talking about. A reflection of the real world. So, the characters aren't going to be walking around loaded for bear on the streets with an M16, rocket launchers, and other military-grade hardware. So, the weapons section ends up having some really cool stuff in it. That's more along the lines of improvised weapons and stuff that you'd end up seeing real people carrying, such as pepper spray, tasers, and actually using a purse as a weapon too, which I thought that was pretty cool, because how many times do you see a mugging on TV where somebody ends up bashing somebody with a purse? So that was a nice touch as well. You don't usually see that in RPG rules. And I think I ended up mentioning a advantage for driving. There's also a brief section on driving. There's also a section on MacGuffin equipment. And that's basically a nice cool little flavor section. Talks about things like voodoo dolls, wary stones, a doctor book, and boo-boo strips. Like a doctor's book would end up being something along the lines of the physician's desk reference library that would end up giving you bonus to healing. Boo-boo strips are sort of like a super duty band-aid. Worry stones, it could sort of be like a super-powered rosary. Voodoo doll would end up being self-explanatory for anybody that's ever seen any B horror movie from the 1950s. There's also a good section on adapting the OSR rules from Swords and Wizardry and other OSR mechanics to use in your Gramma World setting. It also encourages players to be snarky back and forth about the kids these days, and giving an XP bonus. Those young kids with their purple hair. I don't know. Back in my day, we only had 3 hair colors. Blonde, brown, and red. We didn't have no purple or blue hair. You kids look like a parrot nowadays. I'm telling ya. There's also a nice little section on post-retirement living, along with a discussion on different level of Gonzo that you can end up having. The monster section, there's some really good stuff there. It doesn't just cover your typical monster stuff. It ends up having a mix of mundane stuff, a mix of sci-fi robots and other sci-fi aliens and things like that. It also ends up having supernatural type beings, and as well as stuff that your elderly heroes may encounter. One of the favorites there is a gang of elderly bikers. One of the things that's also pretty cool is that David Okum ends up leaving it up to the GM to decide if the bad guys are supernatural or if they're along the lines of like the Scooby-Doo villains that are just wearing a rubber mask that gets pulled off at the end of the adventure. You know, the greedy banker trying to end up taking over the orphanage so he could rip it down and put an oil well in its place. It also goes along with the level of Gonzo that you can end up having. It's open to interpretation for the game master and the players to determine the level of supernaturalism in it, the level of Gonzo, the level of crazy, anything else that you might end up wanting to have in it. It's an open-ended thing that Dave isn't trying to end up saying it has to be Gonzo, or it has to be played straight, or it has to be played Scooby-Doo wise. That was really, really appealing to somebody like me in my group, because you could basically play it any way that your group feels that you want to end up playing, and it's also open to interpretation for how much humor you want to put in it. I mentioned how the book is also chock full of tables. Tables are a great way to get the creative juices flowing. There are name tables which end up helping because as generations end up coming and going, the names end up changing. You don't see that many people named Egbert anymore. You don't end up seeing that many Amelias anymore. By the time our grandchildren end up having grandchildren, I'm sure the names that are popular nowadays are not going to be popular by the time their grandchildren have grandchildren. There's also the standard build your own adventure type tables in the back, which are really helpful when you're trying to do something on the fly. And it's also good for when you've sort of ended up getting writer's block as a game master and want to end up just coming up with an idea. You can end up, instead of just rolling randomly, pick up the ideas that end up looking like halfway decent to you and build an adventure out of that. As well as being a writer, Dave Okum is also an artist, and he does the art throughout the book. It's very reminiscent of some of the artwork that you might end up seeing in some of the older publications like Gramma World, which was sort of the inspiration and the typo for Gramma World. The downside is more genre specific than it is setting specific. In the humor campaign, it's hard to end up bringing the laughs to the table every week or every other week, depending on how often you end up playing. Doesn't matter if you're playing Gramma World or Red Dwarf, Toon, or Paranoia. Trying to bring laughs to the table that often can end up leading to burnout just as quick as running a serious campaign. So Gramma World is a very good filler for when you want to end up taking a break from your regular campaign and end up running an adventure 2 or 3. You can easily fit it into a holiday theme as well if your group ends up taking a holiday break and not everybody's gonna attend a holiday session. You can easily end up turning a movie like Santa Claus Conquers the Martians and convert it into a Gramma World adventure. A good one too, if you end up taking a break around the 4th of July, you can end up having those damn commies end up trying to steal the 4th of July celebrations. Of course, there are the obvious Halloween ones, or stealing a bit that the Dread Cat Bonkers ended up running on New Year's, having the baby New Year's and Father Time being kidnapped. The setting book does end up having advancement paths, but it also easily lends itself to one-shot adventures like that. So you're not left in the lurch if you do want to end up running Gramma World as a campaign. So either way you want to end up playing it, it ends up providing the resources that you need for either one-shots or a full campaign. There's a link to the download in the description so that you can end up downloading it yourself. For the money, it's worth it, you know. The Dread Cat Bonkers has spent a lot more money on more disappointing games. It's $6. You're supporting an actual author instead of some big company with a lot of overhead. And it's worth it just for the laughs, even if you never end up running it. The Dread Cat Bonkers is always willing to support the little guy.